Everybody here? Nobody left behind? Everything is stored in there. Better be locked up. Let's go.
Goodbye, house. Goodbye, old life.
Welcome, new life.
Well, till the spring. Don't be long. Well. Bye-bye.
My sister, my sister.
My wonderful, wonderful, wonderful orchard. My youth, my happiness. Goodbye.
Mama?
Oh!
One last look at the window, the walls. Mother used to love this room.
My sister, my sister.
Mama!
Oh! Oh!
Coming.
And so ends Chekhov's The Cherry Orchard with a sound effect. The sound of an axe chopping down the trees in the magnificent orchard. A moment or so later, another sound is heard. Listen. A sad sound and a dying one. So say Chekhov's stage directions. Rather like a harp string breaking quite high in the air, far off. Now, what do these sounds mean? Chekhov, we know, considered sound effects to be terribly important in evoking the right sort of mood in his audience. What then did he have in mind with this sound of the harp string? Here's a scene in which we first hear that sound.
What's that?
I don't know. Somewhere far off, a bucket has fallen in a mine. But far off.
A bird of some sort. A heron. Or an owl.
It's unpleasant. I don't know why.
It was like that before the disaster. The owl hooted and the samovar hummed and no one knew why.
Before what disaster?
Before the serfs were set free.
The harp string and the axe. On one level, the axe is simple. The cherry orchard is to be cut down to make way for summer cottages. But is it also to be interpreted as a symbol of the revolution that was to destroy the old Russia to make way for the new? And the harp string, is this a symbol of a dying way of life? If so, and a good case can be made for such an interpretation, the meaning of Chekhov's play ought to be clear. Why then have producers of The Cherry Orchard found it so difficult to stage? Chekhov wrote it initially for the Moscow Art Theater. His wife, Olga Knipper, was a leading actress of the company and was to play the leading role in the first production in 1904. This is what Chekhov said of his play.
The Cherry Orchard is a comedy.
The first production was directed by Konstantin Stanislavski. considered by many people to be one of the greatest directors the theater has ever known. This is what Stanislavski had to say about this play.
The Cherry Orchard is not a comedy. It is a tragedy.
To which Chekhov replied in due course,
I am prepared to pledge my word that Stanislavski has not read my play attentively even once.
I met Stanislavski years later, in 1934 to be precise, in Moscow. He was certainly one of the most impressive men I've ever seen. It is difficult to imagine this man being intimidated by anything or anyone, and yet the record tells us that he was afraid of the Cherry Orchard. Rehearsals were a torture for him and for Chekhov, and in the end, the production was a disappointing one. Well then, if the author, who certainly it would seem ought to know what he intended to write, and one of the theater's great directors can disagree so diametrically, what are we to make of the Cherry Orchard? Can we find a clue in this? And another in this? In my view, we can. The combination of these two sound effects is a key to the Cherry Orchard. The axe is real. The musical chord is poetry. Together, they epitomize Chekhov's attitude towards life. The sharp cutting edge of fact, realities that must be faced and lived with, and poetic mystery, the mystery of the unseen, the intangible, the unknown. Chekhov, you must know, was not a political revolutionary, but he was an artistic one. In another play, The Seagull, one of his characters delivers a fine rebellious speech, which was in fact Chekhov's own battle cry.
In my opinion, the modern theater is nothing but tradition and conventionality. When the curtain rises and these great geniuses, these devotees of holy art, try to represent how people eat, drink, move about, and wear their jackets, when from the most commonplace sentences and cliches they try to draw a moral, a petty moral convenient for domestic usage, I run away. I am weighed down with its vulgarity. We need new forms of expression. We need new forms, and if we can't have them, we'd better have nothing.
Now, what new forms of expression did Chekhov introduce to the theater? For one thing, he wrote about the life he knew well. Not life as he would have liked it to be, but as it was. It was a world going to pieces around him, the world of the Russian countryside. A way of life was coming to an end. The serfs, once virtually slaves, had been freed in the early 1860s. A generation later, and the large estates were being broken up. Their owners, born to wealth and privilege, could not adapt themselves to new conditions. Victims of greed, ignorance, indolence, they simply allowed life to sweep by them and seemed unable, most of them, to catch up. And yet Chekhov did not judge these people. He did not criticize. His aim was simple.
I will describe life to you truthfully, and you will see in it what you have not seen before, its divergence from the norm, its contradictions.
Life's divergence from the norm, its contradictions. This, I feel, is the key to Chekhov's presentation of his characters. In this, too, he was rebelling against the theater of his time, with its stock stage figures. Chekhov's characters cannot be pigeonholed. Each is an individual. Each diverges from the norm. Start first with the humblest, Fierce, the old servant.
They were here one Easter, ate a bucket full of cucumbers.
Once a serf, he had been granted his freedom, but had refused it, and now can only look back on the good old days when he was virtually a slave.
In the old days, when we had a reception, generals, barons, admirals used to be dancing here. Now we have to send for the young fellows from the post office.
That'll do, Fierce.
Or take Gaev, 51 years old, the estate he has lived on since childhood going to ruin. He realizes this, and yet can only solace himself with candy and play imaginary billiard games.
You know, they say that I've gobbled up all my fortune in sweets. A yellow ball into the right corner. Cannon off the cushion.
Then there's the neighbor Lopakhin. His father and grandfather were serfs, but he is now rich and desperately eager to rescue the family from their financial difficulties.
Your brother here is always saying what a coarse, money-grubbing fellow I am. Well, I don't care. Let him say what he likes. All I want is that you should trust me, as you used to.
Yet, in the end, it is this man alone who will benefit from the family's ruin. And of course, there is perhaps the most contradictory character of them all, Madame Ranevskaya.
Am I really sitting here? Oh, I could dance about and wave my arms. Perhaps I'm dreaming. God knows I love my home. I love it. I love it. I could hardly look out the train. I was crying too much. But I must have my coffee, just the same. Thank you, Fierce.
Bankrupt, her estate heavily mortgaged, yet Madame Ranevskaya plays the great lady still and scatters what little money she can borrow as though she were a rich woman.
Yesterday, there was quite a bit of money. Today, there's hardly any. You will make me another loan, Yermolai Alexeyevich.
At your service, my dear.
Lopakhin is, of course, at her service. What else can one say to such a charming, helpless woman? But let us pause for a moment. Is Madame Ranevskaya really a charming, helpless woman? A colleague of mine claims she is a predatory animal. She is, he says, the villain of the play and serves the traditional purpose of all stage villains, namely to drive the action toward catastrophe. Personally, I do not agree with this interpretation, although I find it an interesting notion. It demonstrates, I should think, that the characters of The Cherry Orchard, like those of other great plays, and indeed like people in real life, can be seen in many different lights. Take as another example the young student, Trofimov. With the Russian Revolution, which occurred 13 years after the play was written, Trofimov became, in some Soviet productions, the central character of the play, the symbol of idealistic youth rebelling against corruption and decadence, the young prophet of a revolution soon to come.
What have you done to me, Petya? Why don't I love the cherry orchard as I used to? I thought there was no better place on earth than our orchard.
All Russia is our orchard. The world is wide and wonderful and full of beautiful places. Now think, Anya. Your grandfather, your great-grandfather, all your ancestors were slave owners. They owned living souls. Can't you see? From every cherry in this orchard, from every leaf, from the trunk of every tree, human creatures are looking at you. Can't you hear their voices? To own living souls, it's done something to all of you. Those who lived before and those who are living now. So that your mother, you, your uncle, you no longer realize that your lives are being lived at the expense of others, of the very people you don't let inside the door. Oh, Russia's at least 200 years behind the times. As yet we have nothing. No definite attitude to our past. We do nothing but philosophize. We grumble and are discontented. Oh, we just drink vodka. But it's perfectly clear. Before we can begin to live in the present, we must atone for the past, must make a break with it. But such atonement can only be achieved by suffering. Only by tremendous, unremitting effort.
Convincing? Yes, fairly convincing, but somehow basically wrong. For this was not the character Chekhov had in mind. To him, Trofimov was a shabby, moth-eaten specimen, the perpetual student, idealistic but totally ineffective. 27 or 28 years old, he's still pursuing his studies and evidently getting nowhere.
Now, let's go on with what we were talking about yesterday.
What were we talking about?
About human dignity.
We talked and talked yesterday, but we didn't get far. You said you thought there was something mystical about human dignity. Well, maybe in your own way, you're right. But if you look at it in a simple, straightforward way, what is the sense of human dignity? What we have to do is work.
All the same, one has to die.
Who knows? And what does it mean to die? It may very well be that a person has 100 senses. And when he dies, only the 5 die, which are known to us. The other 95 are still alive.
What a clever boy you are, Petya.
Incredibly.
We've seen how Chekhov rebelled against the theatrical conventions of his day in the matter of characterization. What about the business of plot? As you might suspect, a writer like Chekhov would never impose a pattern of action upon his characters. In fact, his plays have no proper plots, no stories you can tell as you tell the story of Oedipus or Macbeth or A Doll's House, and very little action. It is true, of course, that much has happened in the past to Chekhov's characters, but we learn about it in retrospect. The action, in a way, is prologue.
Your sins. What sins have you committed?
Oh, my sins. All my life, I've spent money like wildfire, like a madwoman. I married a man who did nothing but get into debt. He died of champagne. He drank hideously. And then, for my undoing, I fell in love with another man. And at that very time, the first punishment, a blow right to my heart. My little boy drowned in that river out there. I went abroad. I went away never to return. I closed my eyes and fled, never to see that river again. I bought a villa on the Riviera because he'd fallen ill there. For 3 years, neither day nor night did I know a moment's peace. That sick man literally tore me to pieces. My soul shriveled up. Then, about a year ago, I sold the villa to pay my debts and went to Paris. There he absolutely fleeced me and ran off with another woman. I tried to take poison. So stupid, so shameful. And then suddenly I felt myself drawn back to Russia, to my own country. My girl. Oh, God. Be merciful. Forgive me my sins. Don't punish me anymore.
Now, if all or most of the action has occurred in the past, where, you might well ask, is the drama? The answer, or at least one answer, is that there are different kinds of dramatic action, and external action is only one kind. You will remember the speech from The Seagull in which Chekhov called for new forms of expression in the theater. He might well have had his young spokesman continue with these words from a letter Chekhov later wrote to Stanislavski.
After all, in real life, people don't spend every minute shooting one another or hanging themselves. They don't spend all their time saying clever things. They're more occupied with eating, drinking, flirting, and talking stupidities. And these are the sort of things which ought to be shown on stage. A play ought to be written in which people arrive, go away, have dinner, talk about the weather, and play cards. Let everything on stage be just as complicated and at the same time just as simple as it is in life. People eat their dinners. Just eat their dinners. And all the time their happiness is being established or their lives are being broken up.
People eating their dinner, playing cards, talking about the weather. Is it possible to write a play about such trivial matters? Can this be the stuff of drama? It was, in a sense, for Chekhov, as we shall see in our next film.